So today we are going to learn how to build a tic-tac-toe game using React, and so kind of doing it with the React way of doing things with that mindset. And so the best way to get off the ground and running with a React app is using Create React App. And so if you don't have Create React App installed in your terminal, just do npm install -g. That means global. And then create React app. And then after you've done that, then you will just say create React app and then whatever the name is. In this case, I've done tic-tac-toe. And so I'm not going to do that again because I've already done that. There are 3 additional dependencies that I've used for this, and so those are Lodash clone deep, not the whole Lodash library, just clone deep, and then emotion and React emotion. So you'll do npm install lodash dot clone deep emotion and React emotion. Clone deep is a library, a part of the Lodash library that allows you to deep clone an object, and then emotion and React emotion are used for basically writing CSS with JavaScript. So anyway, so you'll need to install those 3 dependencies as well. Once you have your Create React app, once you've run that command to actually generate the project, first cd into the project name and then install those dependencies. All right, so let's get started. So I've already got the project open here. So once you have the dependencies installed, then you'll just say npm start. That takes just a minute to get going. While that's opening, I'll kind of show you where the root file is. So in the source directory, you've got this app.js, and that's where the basically like the main file for the app is. It's actually this index.js, but that's just rendering this app.js. And then everything is going to be a child somehow of app.js. So here's the landing page, if you will, of Create React App. And they've got this nice little spinning SVG. So first thing we're going to do is just delete everything inside of this div, which means we can also get rid of this logo. We don't need it anymore. Let's actually go ahead and get rid of this CSS. We don't need that. So I'm going to save that. Now I should be looking at a blank white page. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and open up the console. I like to keep this open whenever I'm developing, just to keep an eye out for any errors as they come up. It's better to squash those along the way than try to fix them all at the end. All right, cool. So the first thing that we're going to do, let's just go ahead and give this a header real fast. We're going to say h1 tag, and we're going to say tic-tac-toe. All right, cool. So there it is. It's not centered or anything. We'll fix that in a minute. All right, so we're going to have 3 components. I'm going to go ahead and create a components directory. And inside of that directory, we're going to make 3 components. We're going to have board, box, and row. Those are going to be our 3 components that exist. All right, so let's just generate those components. Just pretty straightforward. We'll just make them presentational components right now, meaning they don't have state. They're totally stateless. So const box, and I'm assuming that you've done a little bit of React. I'm going to speak to you in that way rather than this being a totally introductory React lesson. This is kind of a a few things already, and maybe you're just wanting to kind of learn how to code along with this particular project. I would encourage you to first build the tic-tac-toe game by yourself. Pause the video right now, build it on your own, and then come back and see the way I do it, and maybe you come up with a better way. I'd love to see it. If you do, I'm always wanting to learn new ways of doing things. So, all right, so const box, and then we're just going to, let's just return immediately. we're just going to say div, and then let's just say box right now. Export default box. There we go. And then we're going to do the same. Oh, this is not the box. This is the board. All right, cool. Then we're going to do the same for box. Const box. A div that returns an h2 that says box. And we'll do the same for row. This row equals returning a div, and we're just gonna, just for now, we're just gonna pass in this. That's just an easy way to make sure it makes it to the page. Of course, we're not gonna see it on the page yet. All right, cool. So we should be good, no errors. There certainly shouldn't be errors because we're not importing this anywhere into this app.js file. All right, cool. So the first thing that we need to import soon is the board. So that'll be, it's gonna go board row box. That's going to be like the order of descendants. So the board is going to be passed into the app, the row is going to be passed into the board, and the box is going to be passed into the row. So we'll start with this. Let's just say import, oops, we're not in the app.js. Let's go to the app.js. We're going to say import board from /components board. And then now let's just render the board. Just make sure it shows up. Cool, there it is. Now in our board component, we're going to say import row from /row. We're currently in the components file. Here, this app.js lives outside of the components directory, but our board file is inside the components directory, so we just go current directory and row. Now let's go ahead and just render the row. Right now we're just checking to make sure everything renders. And then make sure that did. Yep, there it is. And then we're going to say import box from /box and then render the box. Cool. Looks like we're in business. All right, so let's go ahead and center all of this. We're going to go ahead and do some stuff with React Emotion. So I'm going to say import CSS from React Emotion. And then what this does is it allows you to write CSS like a JavaScript object, and then you can pass that variable name into the class name here. So I can say const app style equals CSS, which is a function that takes an object, and then here I can say text align. You get to write it in camel case. You have to make sure that these values are strings, unless they have to be a number, then they can be a true number. Make them a string, and then it has to be a comma instead of a semicolon like you would do in CSS, because this is an actual JavaScript object. And then now, in this div, I can just say class name, and I pass in this variable. And now this CSS should get applied, and there it is. Cool. So I like it. It eliminates the need for CSS files. It kind of cleans up your file tree a little bit. It allows you to write JavaScript, and I don't know. I just think it's a little bit cleaner approach. Typically, you're not wanting to. Typically, you want your components to have their own styles, and of course, you can also have CSS constants that you pass in. Like let's say you want all of your margins to be 10 pixels, then you could define that somewhere and then pass that in as a constant. That way, if you needed to update things later, you could just change your constants and everything applies to the whole app. Same with like maybe a font color or something. All right, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to think about how we want to set up this this grid. So of course Tic-Tac-Toe is a 3x3 grid, 9 squares. So I could do something like this. I could say like const grid equals like an array of, 3 arrays. I could do something to this effect. Something like that. However, and that's totally valid. You could certainly take that approach. But I like the idea of making this a little bit more flexible, a little more extensible, that we can just, let's say we want to get crazy with it and play a 4x4 tic-tac-toe game or a 17 by 13 tic-tac-toe game. Then we want to give ourselves the ability to do that. So I'm going to say const rows equals 3. So I'm defining how many rows there will be and then how many columns there will be. And then I'm going to build a row array. And what that's going to be is going to be a new array and just passing in the value of rows. So what this is going to do is give you an array of 3 empty elements. And then we're just going to right now just fill that with an empty string. Okay, so that's now an array filled with 3 empty strings. Then we're going to say const column array equals new array columns dot fill empty string. Now grid equals row array dot map the item, and then we are going to return column array dot slice. So if you're unfamiliar with what slice does, it makes a fresh new copy of your array. So for example, I'm going to go dump all this code over into JSBin, my favorite kind of sandbox for JavaScript. Some of you guys might use JS Fiddle or things like that, but same kind of concept. All right, so if I dump this in here, so I've got my grid, right? And so that's what we want. That's the same thing that we saw a minute ago, right? Whenever I hard coded it. And so now if I said I want 4 rows, now I've got 4 rows still by 3 columns. Or if I wanted 5 columns, this would be 4 by 5. Right? So you can say each one of these now has 5, and there are 4 of them, right? So that kind of gives you the idea of what I'm talking about it being flexible, right, and customizable. So now, if I did not have this slice, let's say I remove this slice, right? If I console log grid 0, what that's doing is it's giving me the first array, right? That's with it, the first nested array, and then grid 1 also gives me that first array. However, typically these would not equal each other. And as we know, if I were to say console log empty array triple equals empty array, that's false. Even if I said double equals, that's still false, right? That's because arrays are passed by reference, objects and arrays are technically just objects. However, because I did not slice this here, if I said console.log grid 0 triple equals grid 1, I would expect this to now be true. That's true because it's being passed to the same place. So now, if I were to say grid 0 and then grab the first element of that and set that equal to hello, and then if I console log grid 0, that gives me hello, but it also changed it for the other ones. So now if I just console log grid, well, that's a bad example, but or that's printing all of those is a bad example. But you can see they all have hello as the first element. So we don't want that. What we want to do instead is say slice there. And so now if I say console.log grid 0 triple equals grid 1, I would expect this to return false. And it does. And so that's how we would then be able to just change a single element. You might be able to already see how that's going to be beneficial coming up in the future. So sorry, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's really important that you understand how and why we are building it this way. All right, cool. So we're going to set our state now, and we're going to have boxes. I'll call it boxes. And I could do this. I could just say grid, but I think it'd be cool to maybe have the ability to easily just reset the board later. This code right here will only execute one time when the app first loads. And so what I want to, this is where I want to pull in that Lodash clone deep. And so I'm going to go ahead and resort these. I like to do my custom imports here, things that I build here, and then things that I'm importing that someone else built at the very top. So Lodash was definitely not built by me, and so I'm going to say import, I think it's just clone deep from Lodash clone deep. There it is. Okay, and so this is a function that, as I said earlier, what it does is it gives you, it takes an object or an array and just goes all the way down through, no matter how deeply nested it is, and gives you a fresh copy of everything. So nested arrays are fresh copies. They're not passed by reference. So I can say now clone deep grid. And so now those nested arrays exist in their own reference. They're totally separate now from this. So you might already be able to already see how now we have this kind of empty array state in case we want to reset the board later on. All right, cool. So we're getting there. Let's just console.log this.state.boxes just to make sure we're in business. All right, yeah, that's looking good. I've got my 3x3 grid. And as I mentioned before, I could make this a 4x5 grid. And now I've got it, 4 rows of 5 columns. So you can see, you can already see the benefit there. All right, cool. So what we're going to do is we want to take these boxes and we're going to pass them into the board. So I like to deconstruct everything, or destructure everything. Sorry. So we're going to take these boxes and pass them in to the board as boxes. Oops, not boxes. All right, cool. So now if I go into my board component, there are a couple ways you could do this. You could pass in props here, and then we could have access to this as, let's see, these were boxes. Like, let's say I wanted to pass in boxes here. I could go props.boxes. You could totally do that. That's completely valid JavaScript. But what I actually like to do a lot of times is destructure as I'm passing in. And so now I have boxes available right away, and I don't have to either destructure here or anything like that. And then there are some other benefits that come from this too that I'll show you here in a minute. Cool. So this shouldn't change anything yet with the render. That should be fine. We're not really doing anything yet with the props. All right, so first thing we're going to do is, so we've got these boxes here, and what these boxes actually are is that array of boxes that we saw a minute ago whenever we were console logging. And so if I just said console.log boxes, okay, that way we always have it here. We can always look at it if we need to. So you can see that this is an array of arrays, right? And so when we're in this board component, we are going to actually map over those boxes. So we can say boxes.map. I don't have to wrap this in curly brackets because this part is technically not JSX yet. If I haven't gotten to this is just a regular JavaScript function. This has not become JSX at this point. Typically, whenever you see a map, it's wrapped in curly brackets. That's how you execute JavaScript inside of JSX elements. But there, at this moment right here, there is not a JSX element on the page. So I'm going to say boxes.map. However, I'm actually going to need to wrap it in a JSX element. So we'll go ahead and do that. We're going to wrap it in a div. And then now, curly bracket, boxes.map. And then really, to be honest, these are rows, not boxes. So I'm going to rename those. Rows.map, which means I need to rename this to rows. I'm going to go ahead and leave that. No, we'll change it. So boxes, change all these, and we're just going to call it grid. So it kind of matches up with this constant name. Make sure we didn't break anything. We definitely broke something. Oh, that's just because we weren't done in here. That's why. Okay, cool. So yeah, so rows.map. So we're mapping over each row. We're going to go and pass in the index. We don't need it just yet, but we're going to. And then we want to return a box. Nope, just kidding, a row. All right, so we should be seeing now 3 rows. Yep, 1, 2, 3, and each row is rendering a box. Cool, so we're getting in the right direction. If we were to change rows to 4, we would see 4 rows. Cool, you get the idea. All right, so now each row is a set of boxes, right? And so I'm going to say boxes now equals the row. And so now in this row component, I have boxes available to me. I'm going to go ahead and pass that in here. And then for these boxes, I want to, for this entire row, however many boxes there are, I want to render 1 box for every box. So at this point, boxes, let's go ahead and just kind of console log what this is, what this looks like. So boxes, oops. Well, that broke everything, but we can at least see this. So boxes is an array, right? And so what we can do is we can map over inside of this div, instead of rendering the word row, we're going to map over those boxes. That was 3 elements. So we're going to say boxes.map, and now each one should represent a box. We're going to go ahead and still pass it the index, even though we don't need it yet. And then we just want to return a box. So now, for every row, we should see 3 boxes. Although we're not seeing the word row anymore. And so that's why you don't see that. But this is, each row is 3 boxes. If I were to inspect this, we've got a div with 3 boxes, a div with 3 boxes, and a div with 3 boxes. So you can already see kind of how the structure is getting there. And then the box right now just says box. So cool. Now let's get it in a little bit of a grid layout. Let's make that the next our next task. So we're going to use Flexbox to accomplish that. And so first thing we want to do, if we kind of just look at this structure here, we've got our 3 rows, and then this entire thing is the board. And so what we want to do first I'm going to show you here how to do it, and then we'll go back and add it in the JSX. So the first thing we'll do here, this is actually fine. We don't have to change much, if anything, right here. But on each of these rows, we want to put display flex on these. We will have to do maybe just a little bit of display flex possibly on this, just to kind of center everything. But on each row, let me just show you this one first. We're going to say display flex, so that already gets them in line. And then you can see it goes all the way across. And then, so that means we can just say justify content center. So now they're all brought into the center. So just applying that to each of the rows should kind of get us in the right direction. So again, we're going to pull in a React emotion. So we're going to say import CSS from React emotion. Again, custom imports go below. I'm going to say const row style equals, remember CSS is a function that takes in an object. We're going to say display flex and justify content. Remember we use camel case, center. I would expect that once I pass this in as the class name, that this should work. Let's see. Yes. All right, cool. So we've got our grid, right? So now, really all we have to do now is style those boxes for now, right? There's still a lot more to go, but as far as just making this look like a tic-tac-toe board. Cool. So first thing is, let's just start styling these boxes a little bit. So I'm going to say import, again, CSS from React Emotion. And then const box style equals CSS. And let's see, let's give it, this is going to require a refactor for sure. But we're just gonna kind of get it in the right direction, and then we will go back and refactor. Let's just give them all a border. Let's do that first and kind of see what that does. Class name equals box style. All right, cool. So now each one has a border. You can already see it's getting in the right direction. But they're not squares, right? They're kind of rectangles, and they're defined by its contents. Its contents to get its width. So now you can see that's not good right there, right? So we need to explicitly set the height and the width. So let's say height equals 60 and width equals 60. Okay, so this is going to make it look like a grid, so that's cool. This is not really the React way of doing things, but like I said, we're going to refactor it. So already we've got our grid, but if you remember from your childhood days of playing tic-tac-toe, we do not have this outer border around these boxes. So we are going to write just a little bit of conditional statements to render the correct borders. All right, so instead of just passing in border, what we're actually going to do is pass in border left, border right, border top, and border bottom. We shouldn't see a change. All right, we see the same result. Now, if you notice, this is repeated a lot. Anytime you are repeating code anywhere, you need to stop and see if you can think of a way to dry it up somehow, right? To find a way to not repeat yourself. So what I'm going to do is say const default border equals, and then I'm going to take this value and pass that in there. Now, for all of these, I can say default border. And that should give me the same result, and it does. So now, if I wanted to change the color, I just have to do it in one place. I don't have to go into 4 different places and change the color. All right, so that's cool. Now, we can do the same thing with this value. Because it's being used in 2 places, we know that we always want these to be squares. So we're going to call this size. We're going to set size equal to 60, and then set both of these equal to size. So now if I want to change the size, I just change it in one place. Cool? And they're still always squares. All right, cool. So this is getting closer to the direction of thinking about it the React way. It's definitely drier code, which is what we want. All right, so what we are going to need to do is actually define this a little bit in the return statement. And so we are going to, right now this is an implicit return, meaning we're not directly using the return keyword. We're just going arrow function, parentheses, which is saying return whatever comes next. So what we're going to do instead is curly brackets and then use an explicit return, where we use the actual return keyword, which is perhaps more what you're used to seeing. But especially if you are doing class-based components, then yeah, you're probably definitely seeing the return keyword a lot. All right, cool. So what that does is that allows us to define this box style inside of the render, which sometimes you want, sometimes you don't. The reason we do want that here is we are actually going to um, conditionally render these borders depending on the position of the box. So if it's a corner box, it doesn't, we omit two of them. If it's a top box, middle box, or bottom box, we omit, one of them, that kind of thing. So let's figure out how to do that now. So going back up, let's just go up one level to the row. So we know that this row right here has an index of 0. And we know that all of these boxes, we do not want to have a top row. And so I have this index here, right? And so I can pass in a prop. So I can say, let's call it first row. So if first row is true, if index equals 0. So this expression right here will always return a Boolean. Index either will equal 0 or will not. So this will always be true or false. All right. So now what that means is in this box component, I'm going to pass in first row. So that's one of my props, right? And I'm going to say, so we know that if first row is true, do not give me the top border. Otherwise, if first row is not true, do give me the top border, right? So we're going to say border top. So first row is true, none, else default border. Okay, we kind of did something weird here. Oh, okay. I had it mixed up on what was a row. That's because this is actually the row index. That's my fault. Obviously, it's my fault. It's not yours. All right. So here, I will say first row index equals 0. So I'm passing in first row to the row. Actually, we're just going to call this row index. We're going to pass in the row index because we don't actually need to know yet if it's the first row. So we're going to say row index and then pass in the index. That way we don't have to do all that calculation here. We can do it here where it actually matters. So it makes a little bit easier for the developer to go in and see. So now we have row index available to us. And so we can say if row index equals 0, do not give me a top border. So let's see if that works. And it does. Cool. So now everything on the top row does not have the border. We can clean this up. We're going to do that in a minute, though. Let's work through these other ones. And then if you want to, go ahead and pause the video, see if you can work through the other 3 borders, and then come back to this and see if you get the same solution as me. And then we'll talk about how we can clean this up just a little bit. All right, cool. So we know that first row is when row index equals 0. And then we actually are going to need to pass in if it's the last row or not. So let's do one more refactor. I think first row was the right way to go here, defining this as first row. And then now here we've got first row, which will be a Boolean. So now we can pass in first row here. What that means is now we can pass in last row. And so I'll explain here why we have to do it this way. So it's the last row if index is equal to rows.length minus 1, right? So if I've got 3 rows, then the indexes are 0, 1, 2. And so I can take the length of rows, which is 3, subtract 1, which is 2. If index equals 2, then I'm on the last row. So I can say index equals rows.length minus 1. This also will equate to a Boolean. Now the reason I'm saying let's refactor this and put first row and last row here is if I'm just passing in the row index, that means I also have to pass in the row length into here, and I don't want to do that. That starts to kind of make this component get really cluttered. And so instead, I'm just going to do this logic right here, and then pass in last row. All right, so now I have last row available for me. Last row is last row. And if it's the last row, I do not want a bottom border. So I'm going to say border bottom. If it's the last row, we're going to say none, else return the default border. I need to pass in last row here. All right, and there it is. Cool. So now let's do the left and the right borders. So the first column, column index of 0, we do not want a left border, and the last one we do not want a right border. So here we're going to say first column equals index equals 0, and let's go ahead and do the logic here. Last column equals index equals boxes dot length minus 1. All right, so now we've got first column and last column. So now I can say for border left, is it the first column? If yes, return none, else return the default border. And then the same thing for border right. I can say, is it the last column? If yes, return none, else return the border. So this should work, and it does. All right, cool, so that's looking like a tic-tac-toe board. As I said, we're gonna clean this up just a little bit. And so what we're going to do is, so this is a ternary operator where we're saying if this is true, do this, else do this. But what we can also do, because if we don't return anything here, it will not get a border left. Like if I were to pass in undefined, then nothing has a border left. You can't really see, you can see that these are a little bit thinner, but nothing has a border left because I pass in undefined. So what we can do is, or if the same thing would happen, I think if I pass in false, it would also happen, right? That still sort of equates the same way. And so what I can do is, this is where the benefit of these kind of default props come in. And so I can say, I could say first column equals default border. Set all of these to be default border by default. And then now, instead of having to have this ternary operator, because I'm doing, basically what this is doing is it's saying, okay, there's going to be a prop called first column. Initially, if for whatever reason first column comes in as undefined, set it to the default border. Else, set it to whatever's here. And actually, now that I think about it, I don't think this is going to work because this is going to equate to a Boolean. This is going to come as false. Actually, I misspoke. If this is undefined, then it doesn't. So actually, this may not be. Yeah, this will work. This will work. So by default, it's the default border. And then here, what we're going to say is if first column is true, we just say return none. So now, for all of these, what this is doing is it's saying, okay, first column is true and none. And so that, this may not work. Yeah, that doesn't work. And let me tell you why. Because if first column is false, then this equates to false. And so then there's no border at all. So what we actually need to do is say not first column and default border. And then that should work for these as well. Default border. This I think should work. Yeah, there you go. Which means that we actually then don't need these default values anymore. Cool. So now what we're saying is, okay, if it's not the first column, return the default border. Otherwise, it's just undefined, which means there's not a border left. Okay, cool. Now let's also pass in the size as a prop as well. So we're going to say pass in size. Here, we can give it the default value. So what that means is if I do not pass in a size prop, it will be whatever I give it here. If I say this is 160, then this increases. But now I can pass in a size here, and I can overwrite it to 300 or 3. The world's smallest tic-tac-toe game. Hashtag. All right, cool. So let's say 100. That's a pretty reasonable size, pretty good size tic-tac-toe board there. All right, cool. So we have our UI built. This is all working pretty well. I'm pretty happy with this. It's, as I said before, it's pretty extendable, right? So we can say we want 5 rows and 4 columns, and then now we've got it. We've got our 5 rows and our 4 columns, and so you can see that we have the power to kind of do some other things with it. So that's building the UI. The next thing we're going to do in the next video is talk about how to actually handle the click and display X's and O's onto the board.